as observational aspects from the point of view of the therapist. We have done a primary validation, an Italian sample of 40 participants, and we found that it has very good relativity with some neuropsychological standardized worldwide tests, and also has a very good test reliability over the time in 1 month. Nowadays, we are collecting also in collaboration with MHA some healthy samples here, adults, sorry, in order to extend validation. And at the moment, we are around 100. We hope to arrive 300 participants. So if you would like to test, please come also to the music corner, and we will have a little demonstration. And if you would like to help us in the recruitment, please let me know. Okay. So based on that, also we have done also a first study that wants to evaluate the effects of active group music improvisation training. Study that wants to evaluate the effects of active group music improvisation training, and we conduct this with people with cognitive, mild to moderate cognitive decline. We have done some standardized neuropsychological tests before and after the training, and also we collect some qualitative measure through some interview. And the intervention was basically divided in 35 participants in an active music group and a control group, an active control group that was doing some gentle physical exercise, and for twice a week for 4 months. What we found out was basically, these are, I will not go in details, but how you can see here, basically the experimental group show a significant improvement over the time compared to the control group that remain stable or have a decrease of the performance, especially in the attentional functions that are so important in everyday life, especially in elderly people. Based on that, nowadays, in collaboration with MHA, we are conducting a new randomized control trial design, and in which we are comparing music therapy, but in this case is individual session of music therapy with individual session of storytelling. The important thing is that both the methods used were matched protocol on mood matching and improvisations, and also we are adding biomarkers in order to triangulate better the result we are collecting from the qualitative measure, from the quantitative neuropsychological test. And basically we recruit at the moment 49 participants, and with mild to moderate cognitive impairment, and they will do for 4 months, once a week, or storytelling activity or music therapy activity. So before and after the session, how I said, we will do some standardized neuropsychological tests. If you want to know more in detail, we can speak later. One of these is the music cognitive test that we are validating. We will measure also some through some questionnaire, the well-being and the quality of life of the participant, also their motivation, the locus of control, to see how the training can make some changes over the time in this kind of aspects. In order, before and after the session, before and after the training, we will collect a all-day saliva collection, in which we will want to measure the cortisol level that, as you know, is related to stress level, and also the dihydroandrosterone, that is a steroid hormones that is related to the aging aspects of our brain. Furthermore, we want also to measure through electroencephalogram the cortical response to a continuous speech tracks through a method of colleagues of us from the École Normale Supérieure de Paris, and also we are conducting a monthly interview with the therapists to monitor the point of view over the time. So also, before and after the session, on the beginning and on the last part, we are doing some of the intervention. Yes, we are collecting also some cardiorespiratory physiology through RSA and the hormones collection before and after the training to see the differences. And also we will conduct a midterm daily hormone collection to monitor all over the time the changes.
Okay, right. I'm having a task to wrap up, and then I realized I forgot to play a very nice video clip, which I will do at the end. So we are hoping to be done with that collection by April 2019 for this first study. And of course, the first outcome will be Anthony's PhD. very important. And then we are going to apply to Dunhill Medical Trust to develop this study in a number of directions. Amongst these directions, we would like to develop the music cognitive test in a tablet app type of version, so that this could be, apart from commercialized, could be used much more easily in applied context. We would like also to extend this to different contexts and populations, like to do a version of this test for children or atypical groups. And with the help of Tatiana, we will also try to do a feasibility study to use eye tracking in the real world, which is a little bit challenging with the technology we have at the moment, but we can do some tests to monitor the interactions between therapists and clients. And quite exciting development in the spring last year with Davis Kinellato and student Sarah Cooper from Design Engineering Mathematics. We had done some pilot work with this humanoid robot Pepper. Anthony and Sarah developed some cognitive tests based on psychological tests that people can interact with the robot, and this is sensitive to the level of performance. So the next game proposed is based on the level of performance on the previous game. We've done a pilot study with healthy 65 plus at the end of the last academic year with very nice results. That is, they seem to think that this would be a suitable partner for games and so on, also, you know, for companionship in certain situations. So we would very much like to try and pilot the use of this in care home settings, for example. And so this would also potentially be part of the next application. And Emma and I are having a new PhD student started in January who is potentially interested in developing this. So I am finished, but I really want to show that video clip. Do I have a few minutes? All right, can we find it? And then I will show the last slide. This is a very nice clip because not only it shows. Sorry?
Is it back in presentation again?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's just in the presentation. And can you start it? So this lady is interacting with music therapist. You just watch and then I'll tell you. So I start talking. So not only here you see how the interaction between the music therapist and the lady is, you know, there are adjustments that go on all the time. But this lady, as you can see, remains completely, totally focused throughout this time. And as you can see, she is quite poorly and impaired in a number of ways, and yet she's so attentive. And at the end of the clip, we'll probably not run to that. She said, "Oh, I loved it." And she is sometimes having some problems with timing, but sometimes she's very good. So it's like, you know, a bit of an on and off, but basically, in some points, she is extremely good. And you might think that she has an odd pattern of drumming, okay? This is not how we normally drum. So at the beginning, when I saw this clip, I thought maybe she had some neurological problem or something. But the truth is, she was a dancer. She was a professional dancer, so she's doing a choreography here. And so that will also be useful for what we talk later with Nikki. Okay, I think we can stop here, and I'd like to put the last slide. Okay, so she said I loved it. Okay, just put the last slide for the funders and everybody we want to thank. Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Thank you both of you for really beautiful footage as well. And that's why I love this day, just to hear about all the work that's going on that we don't know about. Any questions? Yes.
Can I just check up? Yeah, at the beginning, you talked about mood matching. Did I interpret it correctly that what you seem to be suggesting is that you can't make somebody, if somebody is sad, you don't try to play them happy music? Is that
Well,
basically?
you can try,
Yeah.
but that's not going to help them
Right.
in terms of functioning better. And that's why, I mean, there have been qualitative studies showing that people, when they are sad, they tend to choose to listen to sad music, basically.
Is there a proximity thing? So, I mean, there must be degrees of sadness. And
Yes.
Can you lift people's mood by gradually going?
I would
Yeah.
imagine. This is, I think, exactly what happens in music therapy. So
Right.
that's why we found this point of connection between sort of experimental work, like what I do, and the kind of work that they do, because this is something that in music therapy has always been done, and in some way, if you like, has not been noticed as one of the key aspects. And we've done experimental work. And with Emma, we've done experiments involving the older adults, and it worked extremely well with them. We have significant results on all sorts of areas of memory, including recall memory. That is an area that is particularly tricky for 65 plus. And so yes, that's the way it is. What is interesting is that this happens also for negative moods. The effect is even stronger for negative moods. So sad to sad or angry to angry are particularly strong. Any more questions?
That's really interesting, thank you. Just to say that building on Emma's work, we're having a formal sort of partnership with the University of the Third Age now, to talk about doing some presentations for them now, help with our research and mentoring the students. And we've got a big group of 550 from the Hendon area belong to that. So I would have thought, firstly, they'd be really interested in that, but secondly, if you need comparison groups, they're happy to be on.
That'd be amazing, thank you.
I thought it was really interesting that the lady in the video, she had quite good rhythm, and it was telling that you said she was a dancer. So, I mean, is it is your previous level of musical experience a factor in how far it can improve or doesn't improve your cognitive?
Yes, well, in general, in those slides full of names and things that nobody can read, that's part of that story. So it has been found that musical training in childhood or young age is like a protecting factors for later on for cognitive functions, memory, working memory, and flexibility. So for the executive and so on, is in general a protecting factor. I don't know if people who have had musical training are more susceptible to react positively to music therapy. I turn the question to Ming and Sarah. What would you think? Possibly, but not necessarily.
How's musical education distributed across socioeconomic status?
Music education is, music education, to define somebody as like a musician in this kind of studies, you need to have had a very minimum of 8 years of musical training, if not 10. So that is less than 10% of the population.
I was thinking even more prosaically than that, though, that to do music in school requires actual resources from your parents. So you're more likely to have personally respond.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It depends also on the community, obviously, because there are communities where music is a very important part of the social life, and therefore, those people going to church, for example, singing in choirs, gospels. I have several students now who work on things having to do with music, and some of them do not come from wealthy backgrounds, but they've had quite a bit of musical experience through, for example, going to church and singing in choirs and so on. So it's a bit difficult to track, but if we talk about a certain type of, conservatoire type of training, there is an association with social variables, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
next one is Julia Barossa, who's going to talk about cross-cultural work for dreams and examples for Cairo. And you've got to 20 parts.
Okay, so thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm not recognized.
Right, just give me a minute.
Okay, great. So, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. So, this is following this beautiful piece of research and interspersed with others. This is going to be a different style of presentation. I've got text and very few slides and different topic as well, but hopefully some of you at least will find one. So, yeah. So, thank you. Yes. So we only have 3 slides, which I'll show at the end. But what I would like to do this morning is present to you some work I've been doing in the context of a project co-funded by the AHRC Newton and the Masharaf Foundation. It's called Egypt's Living Heritage, and is a collaboration between British and Egyptian colleagues. The aim of the project as a whole was to enable community engagement into extending the meanings of potentialities of what can be termed heritage. It's centered on a neighborhood surrounding El Moez Street in Islamic Cairo, where traditional and historic forms of craft and art practices were reevaluated in terms of their living engagement, living presence of the past. Here, the notion of an intangible tacit transmission of heritage formed a key and innovative aspect of the project. An interdisciplinary approach lay at its core, as it brought together in its implementation and inception colleagues from the Arts and Cultural Studies, such as Professor Caroline Mooney, Archaeology, Professor Fekri Hassan, Folklore Studies and Ethnography, Doctors Mustafa Gad and Ahlam Rizk, and psychoanalysis, myself. So a series of workshops on photography and film, literature, storytelling, painting, and music were held in Cairo in 2017. Memorabilia was collected from the inhabitants of the neighborhood, as well as their accounts for the reasons of choosing each piece. And this formed the basis of an exhibition that further served to decenter the meaning of heritage. And one strand of the project, the one that I was involved with centrally, was conceived around the significance of dreams and dream telling. And I had originally in mind the idea of conducting a series of social dreaming workshops in the neighborhood, and more about that later. Ahlam Rizk's work as a folklorist had involved collecting and categorizing dreams for a number of years, and she published publications in Arabic around that. And she was my main conduit into Islamic traditions of dream interpretation, and she introduced me to Sheikh Mustafa, who's a traditional dream interpreter based at the shrine of Ibn Sirin, as the 17th century scholar who's widely considered to be, if not the originator, then certainly the most prominent proponent of a Muslim tradition of dream interpretation. What I would call the extensibility of psychoanalytic psychotherapy for psychotherapeutic forms of encounter, both theoretical and clinical, the extensibility of practice and institution beyond Western roots, beyond its historical and current institutional geographies or even contexts, such as a private consulting room, an NHS clinic, wards, and so forth, has been a long-standing research preoccupation of mine, and maybe some of you, Lucia and I presented 2 years ago at the first research showcase some of her work in a favela in Brazil along those lines, about extending the practice. My clinical practice as a group analyst is grounded in the development of psychoanalysis, whose very premise is to take for granted man's social nature and the importance of the community in which the lives of individuals unfold. However, it is important to clarify that paying attention to this materiality need not displace what is understood and unconscious in that tradition, along with its productive mysteries, but it may lead us to consider it differently. As we are invited in a spirit of more expansive relations to render understandings of the psyche more flexible and inclusive. My contention here is simply that connection, communication, free association, the very possibilities of talking and being heard in profound, effective and transformative ways upon which psychoanalysis and its derivatives as a form of treatment are predicated, is achievable in as yet unrealized ways, and in different contexts as well, and sometimes for a very short time it could have an effect. Surprising. So dreams, their language, their subjective and social meanings, and the politics of their interpretation provides one of the main prisms to which these wider interrogations are pursued. So dreams and their interpretation have a long history and continue to have a contested but lively place in contemporary Egypt, as the anthropologist Amir Mittermeier has shown in her brilliant ethnography, Dreams That Matter. Her book is a result of fieldwork she conducted in Cairo in the mid-2000s amongst communities who attached definite significance to dreams and engaged with dream-telling practices in a particular way. She had the 4 key informants, sheikhs who all had more or less close connections with Sufi traditions of Islam. And one of these was the predecessor in Cairo of this man, who I got to collaborate myself later. A key connecting term in her account is barzakh, which for her interlocutor is simply a space where the spirits of the dead dwell, but whose meaning she extends and uses throughout her research to refer to an in-between space, a space occupied by the imagination and the unknowable. So she discusses dreams, so she looks at what particular space is given to the sacred in this context, and she discusses dreams which are to be taken literally as communications from the divine, visitation dreams, and could serve as a guidance in life. While there are, and here this might join up in a strange kind of way to psychoanalysis, because while there are definite traditional accepted meanings to oniric images that are recorded, that could be found in many manuals popularizing Islamic dream interpretation, it's actually crucial that the dream hearing, the practice of hearing dreams, and as well as telling dreams, is bound up in a space of lived lives in an interlocutionary relational context that is outward-looking and reaches towards the future in all kinds of ways. So it's a practice for living, but connected to the past and the losses. So Freud, on his warns his readers famously that every dream, no matter how fully examined, will always retain a navel, a point of contact with the unknown. But the question is, my question is here, is it solely individual, or is there more? Could dreams connect, or how do dreams connect? So the term navel is interesting because it's that's a definite, it points to reaching inside the body to the drives. But there's this really paradoxical, strange sentence on which Freud ends his dream book, which he says that their dreams are fulfillment of a wish, but picturing our wishes as fulfilled, dreams are after all leading us into the future. But this future, which the dreamer pictures as present, has been mounded by his indestructible wish into a perfect likeness of the past. So there's really this strange collapsing of temporalities at work here, which is very interesting. But the question here is, what is this? Is there a social dimension to the wish? Can dreaming this future be extended to more political meanings? So the implications of Mittermeier's work is that individual dreams channel to not only to channel individual desires, but perhaps all the desires in terms of the community as well. So these individual desires are connected to the community. And here I will mention briefly social dreaming as developed by Gordon Lawrence at the Tavistock Clinic. And I had originally conceived of this project as involving social dreaming workshops. So Lawrence's premise, derived from Charlotte Barrett's work on the dreams of Jewish doctors, which he collected in Germany in the lead up to the Second World War. That dreams tap into, oh goodness, social collective anxieties, yet unprocessed, but which can be collectively drawn out. As a method, it's a method rather than a clinic, and it directs attention away from inward turning towards wider cultural preoccupations. Dreams shared in a group capture the political and institutional aspect of dreamer social context. So this has been used at conferences and at one-off settings to address traumatized institutions and so forth, and communities as well. So I had thought that this would be a really good method in Cairo, but what I have not taken into account is the very different, just how contested and controversial dream-telling may be in a context such as contemporary Cairo and the aftermath of its revolutions. But what proved possible was something potentially much more radical. We held 2 meetings. The first was in an open space, a cafe next to Ixarin Shrine. The participants, so right outside this shrine here, the participants were mainly students from an MA on Heritage Management convened by Fekri Hassan. And following a visit to the shrine, we sat in the open cafe mentioned. Next to the shrine, we were joined by the sheikh. We shared dreams and associations, moving between English and Arabic, between the sheikh's interpretations. He always asked about the context of the dreamer's life. And we shared particularly oniric images of flying constraint, which led to a very moving sharing of a young woman's dream of her dead mother, whose presence was there amongst us as a visitation. And what emerged is that how we agreed that the meaning of one person's dream was not necessarily the same as one image in another person's dream, and yet connected. So these images flying and constraint were not identical, but connected to each other. That said, the sharing of dreams came to reveal a collective mood pertaining to life in Cairo as a common circumstance. Associations led to anxieties about survival and subsistence in these uncertain times, while the shared memory of the uplifting revolutions of 2011 that brought people together remained vivid. The fact that this moment had led to socioeconomic difficulties unaddressed, had issued in feelings of hopelessness and disappointment, experienced both individually and in common. And this sense of a profound unease, mourning and longing at the level of the social unconscious is what most strikingly emerged and continued to be touched on in a very different group we held the following day. This was in a historic building, being in process of renovation, in the heart of El Moez Street. And here, in addition to many participants in the first group, including the sheikh, who came with one of his colleagues, we were joined by members of the community, including women clad in niqabs, the building cleaners, male shopkeepers, a group of young schoolgirls who wandered in due to posters outside the building announcing the event, and as well, together with middle-class Egyptians in Western dress, so a real mix of people. Chairs were set up in a circle, and that was really important. That is, and the group is composed of people who otherwise do not get to talk together to talk amongst themselves, and that was really key. And in this way, the exchanges took place in Arabic, with somebody assigned to translate for us. The sheikhs had more authority, but what was really interesting was the horizontal sharing of the space, potentially subversive to both traditions of dream interpretation. One of the cleaners, who came in uniform in the middle of her shift, challenged the sheikhs, claiming her own status as dream interpreter. And this, and one of the young girls, who was visibly upset about her dream not being attended to in the way that she needed, was one of the participants got up and said, well, just draw it for us. And this is what she's doing, drawing her dream. So we did not necessarily agree on interpretation, but what emerged from our experiment was the possibility of a new methodology. Sharing our dreams enabled us to speak to each other in ways we would not otherwise, ways that cut across social and cultural divisions without denying the imbalances of power and authority, which were always certainly there. In some respects, our common ground may have entailed a shared aesthetic language across cultures around the fact that dreams are seldom literal. The consideration that was raised that we were not so much engaged in an anthropological approach to the social as in an imaginative approach to the social. And as such, we spoke to each other in stories, symbols, metaphors, and produced these dream images. And while we began our session with a sung prayer sung by the sheikhs when we left the heritage team shared songs across our, in the car on the drive back, we shared songs across our separate traditions. So I think that's what I wanted to share with you.
Two questions. One, thank you very much. One, so what came out of the dreams relating to what's going on?
Well, what came out of the dreams is that I profound anxiety on both days. And that's a longer account, because the first day was really, what struck me is the account of the young woman who shared the dream of her dead mother, that really crystallized something for everybody in the group around loss and mourning, and really functioned to set the mood and unite people. So after the formal part of the group, the sharing the dream group ended, and that's when we moved to conversations about how difficult life was, and employment and so forth. But there was something in the dream images that captured that, just as Lawrence's work work in social dreaming was an illustration of that. But in this particular, very free, different kind of context.
Are they used to having their dreams interpreted?
Some of them yes, some of them no. So some of them yes, definitely had an interest in dreams. And
By
some by sheikhs. By sheikhs, by themselves.
Yeah.
So none of them were involved with therapists. Actually, none of the people in that group. Although I have to add, there is a tiny psychology. There's a long history of psychoanalysis in Egypt, but a tiny current presence. And there's other forms of therapy and practice, Gestalt, which I want to do with Gestalt, drama therapy as well as quite alive. That I would argue that they share something in common, these forms, some of them at least, share lineage with the Freudian tradition, as opposed to dreams.
Oh, very quick question,
Quick
Nazim.
question. How did you deal with the language? I mean, how does it work? This kind of
The first, actually, it was two interpretations. So the first group was a bilingual group, because a lot of the group members were the students who did speak English, so we spoke in both languages, and some of them interpreted what they were saying. The second group, that's where we were more observer. That was much more of an observer position, because that was entirely in Arabic, and it was the community group. But I had a translator, so I worked with a translation.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia. And next we've got Strictly Come Dancing, and Broadly Come Reading, Nikki and Fabio again. And sorry about that. 22, you've got till 22 and then it's tea and coffee. Yeah. Are you looked up there already?
Well, no, that's really fun, so it's in here.
Okay, which file are you going to open up?
Not the fucking table and and then.
Right, I'll make a start again and then hand over to Nikki. Whoops.
Say enable external content.
What is
Oh,
it?
you've got something different up there than I've got here. I can see my slide.
Then exit your slide. Exit your slide. Press escape.
Okay. All right. Okay. So again, I'll make a start and then hand over to Nikki.
Oh, you're dancing.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, actually, that's fake news.
That was us in my dreams.
Yeah, exactly. But Kulisa is actually my ex-master student, and she was a principal professional. Yeah, she was when she was dancing professionally. Anyway, there are lots of people that are involved in this study. George, we see here, Lucy has joined us recently. Anna Roos from Amsterdam, and so on. Other students have helped with data collection. Again. If you remember, I earlier on said that there have been lots of studies showing benefits of music on all kinds of cognitive functions. Here we concentrate more on language. And well, going to Tom's question, if you have a look at this, this is something that came in the news last year, a school in Bradford that introduced music lessons on a weekly basis, had scores at the end of the academic year way above anybody else. So generally speaking, we have again, specifically on language, some transfer effects across from music to abilities that are very relevant and important for language. And starting from very early on, already in 3- and 4-year-olds, children, we know that the abilities, musical abilities, particularly related to rhythmic processing, both perception and production, are associated with superior performance in phonological processing and other abilities, very important for the development of reading. Some studies have shown some of the interesting effects. Like this one, for example, was an fMRI study in which they showed words, text, and scores to participants in the scanner. And the non-musicians, as perhaps not surprising, have the expected activations on the left side of the brain when looking at text, and nothing much going on when looking at scores. They basically process a score as something having to do with something we look at, so with it, just there is something back here. Whereas the musicians have bilateral activations when they look at the scores, but also when they look at text. So there is a different way of processing all the written material that is coming from their musical training. These were all very high-level conservatoire musicians. Another interesting piece of evidence from Bruce and colleagues showed that actually even within the very high-level professionals in music, there are different abilities, and that the jazz musicians are actually the super fast ones because they are improvising all the time. So they do this sort of constant tracking, and then in all sorts of perceptual tasks, they came up to be superior. So with Nikki, we ran this study focusing on plasticity, and saying, well, okay, in this study that showed that there is a positive facilitating effect of musical training on reading, for example, there is a confounding effect. That is that if we test musicians, particularly conservatoire musicians, these are people that also have additional reading experience, okay? They read more. Not only they are musical people, but also they read more. They read the novels that we read and the newspapers that we read, but they also read scores. So they have additional reading practice. And therefore, we tried to separate, first of all, these two aspects of musicality from additional reading experience. And so we tested musicians typically classically trained, so people who read and write scores, and also musicians with the same level of expertise, but that are musicians by ear. They never read and write scores and controls. And we have a very tiny cognitive assessment to see whether our groups were equals, and they were not significantly different. And as you can see from this graph, these are the musicians who read, these are the musicians who do not read music, and this is our controls. And in the reading test that we used, when we looked at accuracy, both musical groups were performing significantly better than the control group. Whereas for speed, reading speed, only the professional musicians who read music were faster than the other two groups. The musicians by ear were not significantly different from the musicians who read music, but they were not significantly different from the controls either. So we decided to extend this study, partly because recruiting in this area, the musicians by ear and so on, it's very difficult because it's very difficult to match them on all kinds of variables on the musicians who are classically trained. They are a lot easier to find and to classify and rate and so on. So we decided to focus on one particular aspect of music, that is rhythm, that has been shown in a number of studies to be associated with reading abilities. And we decided to work with professional dancers as the super expert group for rhythm. It was a tidy group in the sense that they typically do not read music, and they are specifically working in their professional practice with rhythm and timing rather than the melodic aspect of music. So in many ways, in their practice, we can see an embodiment of rhythm characteristics versus just paying attention from an auditory point of view. So we've done this new study with coulisses, comparing dancers, two professional musicians, two controls. And I'll hand over to Nikki. No, I can carry on.
No,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I can carry on. No, I was expecting another slide in there. That's okay. Right, talking about.
I don't know where it's gone.
Don't worry.
It's after this.
Right. Okay, so our sample so far. This is a very messy sample. Obviously, if you're trying to recruit sort of top-level dancers, you just test whoever you can get. So we've tested so far with three sort of high-level ballet companies. We've tested the Royal Ballet, Wayne McGregor Studio, and the Hoffer Company. Because these are high-level dance companies, a lot of the dancers come from abroad, so they're not native English speakers. So again, we've just kind of tested everyone who signed up on the day. So a very, very messy sample. So in the Royal Ballet, we had 9 native speakers. So we either said they had to be native or they were at least educated in English. So they were speaking English day to day for their education from a young age. We had 3 non-native speakers. At Wayne McGregor, we had 6 native speakers. 2 of them were dyslexic, again, messing up the sample a little bit, but adding an interesting dimension nonetheless. And 3 non-native speakers. At Hofesh, we had 3 native speakers and 5 non-native. So a very sort of mixed bunch. We then had our comparison group, so our musicians who'd had at least 8 years of formal training. Within that group, we had one of the opera singers from the Royal Opera House, and we would have liked to have tested more, but we only managed 1 at the time. But I had a couple of students, undergraduate students, doing some testing for me last year as part of their dissertation, and they recruited a whole bunch of non-dyslexic and dyslexic musicians, so they had this high-level training. And then we also sort of there's ongoing testing of our controls, so we have a mix of native, non-native, dyslexic, non-dyslexic. And as you can see at the bottom, we have other groups being tested. We're testing ballet dancers in Brussels, Amsterdam. Lucy's working with us, hopefully going to be testing Ballet Rambert, Middlesex students, and ballet dancing RA is currently testing in New York with various, and around America with various companies there. Right, so this is how I'm used to testing. I'm very formal, sitting behind a desk testing, paper, pencils, know what I'm doing. This is the situation I found myself in. You'd be testing someone on the floor in the studio, they suddenly go into the splits, their leg will be up here, be doing random things, so it's very out of my comfort zone, but it was different, it was fun. So we are rapidly running out of time, so just give you a quick overview of some of the main cognitive tests that we used. There's a whole bunch of tests we used. So one is sort of speed of processing, so you give a key at the top and the person has to then go along, they see the symbol, they have to write the number associated with the symbol, so it's a general sort of speed of processing task. The WASI matrix, so I won't ask you to spot the correct answer here. It goes from very simple, you have to say which of the shapes at the bottom completes the missing box at the top. This is the simplest one, that on the right is the hardest one, and if you want to know what the answer is, ask George. He works out the solution to the one on the right, which I never quite worked out. And then a couple of sort of language type tests, a spoonerism test. This is a really nice test of on-the-spot sort of phonological processing. So the person doesn't see the names, but you just read out names like Jensen Button, and the person has to swap over the initial sounds to produce Benson Jetton. It's a really difficult test, and there's a lot of really intelligent people who cannot do this test. So it's a really nice test of phonological processing. There are problems with it that we can talk about later. There is a memory component. So if you don't know the name, you then have to try and remember the name. A lot of these non-native dancers, they had difficulty with this because the names weren't familiar to them. So we're working on that. Standardized vocabulary measure, again, just getting people to define words. Our reading test, we were trying to find a general reading test that would properly assess someone's reading ability. A lot of standardized reading measures, you just read individual words. That's not a sort of ecologically valid way of testing reading ability. So the best that we came up with was this called the adult reading test. So the participant just reads a series of passages. There's 5 passages of increasing difficulty. Then they answer questions on them. So it's a measure of reading speed, reading accuracy, and then comprehension ability. And they do get sort of increasingly difficult. And finally, a test of rapid automatized naming, which is implicated in dyslexia, so sort of speed of ability to name things. So just show a couple of cards with numbers on, and the person has to just read them as quickly as possible as individual numbers, so 3, 2, 5, 3, 3, 1, 3, 5, so on. And this is a really nice test that often you can tell if someone's dyslexic or not just by doing this test. There's a real sort of noticeable difference. It's quite nice. Fabi's just going to tell you quickly. Okay. Sorry, I'm rapidly running out of time.
I will not talk a lot about this, but with Coolies we created this dancer musicality index because we want to try to assess the musicality of dancers in a number of areas. So it's not validated, so it's the first time we use it. It's basically agreement scales, 22 items, tapping on choreography, learning music for a new ballad. Do you pay attention, for example, to what other people do rather than try to figure it out yourself when it gets too difficult? Trying to tap on individual differences on this. But more interestingly, we have introduced 2 rhythmic tasks that they have to do. One is a beat alignment task, in which they hear a very short piece of music with the metronome superimposed. Sometimes it's on the beat, sometimes it's off the beat, and they have to tell me if it is on the beat or off the beat. So how do we do this? Whoops.
You didn't click
PC
accept.
problem.
No, you didn't click accept external. Remember the screen.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Anyway, this is, you've understood the task. And then the other one is a rhythm continuation task. So they hear a particular rhythm, say, 3 times in a row, then there is a gap before number 4, and they have to continue and reproduce. Some have got strong beat, other weak, and some are extremely long and extremely difficult to do. So,
Right, so just to give you a really quick overview of the results. This is ongoing, so we're still testing as many people, we're still recruiting. So we just hope to give you an idea of what we're finding so far. A lot of this is, I'd say, in progress. And just to give you an idea, I just want to focus on the dyslexic readers, particularly at the moment, just to give you a snapshot of what's going on. So on the sort of cognitive baseline measures, the ones that you would not, well, you'd hope there wouldn't be many differences. So we've broken it down into the dancers, the musicians, and the controls, and then we have the measures on the vocabulary test, the simple digit, and the matrix. So these are just sort of general cognitive processing ability. You can see there's not a massive difference between the 3 groups. When we look at the spoonerism test, again, there's not a huge difference in terms of accuracy with the green bars, so they're able to perform the test, but you can see there's quite a noticeable difference in terms of how long it's taking them to do the test. Some of the controls had real difficulty with this. And then with the adult reading test, again, I have to emphasize that these are small numbers of participants, so it is ongoing, but you can see there is a difference sort of emerging between the 3 groups. It does seem to be that the dancers and the musicians are better in terms of their speed of processing, so their words per minute, how quickly they're able to read the text, how accurately they're able to read it, and their comprehension ability. As I say, it's very small samples, but there's an indication that there is something interesting there. And so there does seem to be, as the literature suggests, there is possibly some kind of protecting factor in people who do have this rhythmic awareness. It does seem to help support their difficulties with phonological processing, their difficulties with reading in dyslexia. And it seems to be that dance may help more with this rhythmic awareness than maybe the strictly musical processing ability. And there are some really high level dancers who are dyslexic. So Darcy Bussell is dyslexic, and she's talked about her dyslexia. Sabrina Brazzo, another very famous Italian ballet dancer, she's very dyslexic. And yet this doesn't seem to stop them progressing with their musical career. And just to bring everything back to Strictly, apparently Cara Toynton, who won Strictly in previous years, again, very dyslexic, but very good rhythmic ability. And just, do you want to?
Okay, yes, so that's really to close. Again, of course, we are increasing the sample as much as possible.
Yeah.
Still
so if any of you are
this,
professional ballet dancers on the quiet, please let us know.
Anything, okay. And we have two developments in mind. One is, of course, if we have encouraging stable results showing that dance is facilitating things having to do with reading, then we can try to get funding to do again a randomized control trial with an intervention, a dance intervention in schools, for example, particularly in the middle primary school where the difficulties with reading might emerge, and dance classes might perhaps support children at that point. And we're doing some quite challenging but interesting work with the ethnomusicologist Robbie Campbell at SOAS, in which we are trying to look at this kind of problems in a cross-cultural context. He is working with choppy Master Soptimbila, which is this kind of xylophone, and babies are immersed right from the beginning in a polyrhythmic environment all the time. So they play this from the beginning, they hear this, etc. So we were trying to adapt tools for assessment and so on, so that we can actually compare children reading abilities in rural context versus urban context, where they would not have this kind of exposure all the time from minute one. And I think that's comes to conclusion. Thank you very much.
That was really interesting. Thank you. Questions?
Is Colleen still collecting data?
Yes, this week, this very week.
Is she?
Yes.
Oh, she's so
In New York.
lovely. I'm just so glad that I hooked her up with you guys.
Yes.
She came to me to see whether she would like to join us to do the master's conversion. She wasn't sure because she's got so many things. She's so good at everything, isn't she? She's a dancer, she's a physiotherapist, and she didn't know what to do for a project. And I said, look, go for somebody who's challenging but really at the top of her field. Go to Fabia. And that it works out so well that you can actually incorporate her dance as well. What a fantastic project. Sorry, that's just...
Yeah, no, thank you, Jackie.
There's a question back. Who was there? George.
So both professional dancers and professional musicians, something they have in common, I imagine, is that they're able to concentrate for long periods and practice to become professional. And would that account for the difference in abilities between them and the controls in terms of the task systems? Do you account for that?
I mean, they're able to practice and spend lots of time practicing their dance, but I mean, sort of speaking personally, they were just as distracted in the tasks, and they'd go off topic. I'd say they'd suddenly go into a pirouette or something in the middle of testing, and you have to kind of bring them back to topic. So they were just, I didn't notice any difference. Yeah. Same
scales, forwards, backwards, and so both groups do have a general.
But in terms of the dyslexics, if they have these cognitive difficulties, these phonological difficulties, they should still be there, no matter how much you practice. The difficulties should still come out on the cognitive measures, and yet it seems that they're not having the same level of difficulty as the non-musical, non-dancing controls.
Right.
The picture in the non-dyslexics is a lot muddier, so we definitely need sort of bigger groups to see what's going on. There are some really strange results coming out of the controls.
And Martin.
Yeah.
Quick follow-up on that. I think it's a really interesting question, because I had many years of teaching a group which was musicians plus fine artists. What was really interesting is the musicians, they didn't expect immediate returns on what they did. They were happy to practice scales, knowing that they didn't want to play scales. Whereas people from fine art wanted to produce artifacts. I think that's a really interesting question, whether there's something about this willingness to practice things without expecting immediate returns.
I think this is common. This is common between the dancers and the musicians. I mean, the dancers are also working all the time. That's partly why we are doing so slowly, because it's very difficult to find a window when they are not practicing, doing physiotherapy, doing weights, doing rehearsals, and so on. And it is that kind of drive that makes people professional at this level. So that, I think that is common indeed between them, and probably is something that helps people to stay focused. So it has an effect on certain aspects of cognition, the fact that you have the sort of drive to stay focused for a long time, which we saw in the clip of the lady with the drum, because she was completely focused and immersed in her choreography on
So
the drum.
the musicians always made better programs for the teaching program, but they always made better programmers than the fine artists, because they knew they had to practice programming before they wrote the program.
That's interesting. So it's a skill component.
One more question, and then
Just another way of asking all these questions is, presumably there are dyslexic individuals who cope phenomenally well with dyslexia and have absolutely no contact with anything musical or rhythmic in their lives, to the degree that you're discussing here. So what do they do instead?
I presume they would still have a lot of support through their well, I would hope they have a lot of support through their schooling. So there's still lots of intervention, so lots of practice at doing the phonological processing, the reading. And so this is why we are testing non-reading, non-dancing controlled dyslexics as well.
Yeah, no, that's not quite what I meant, though that's a partial answer to it, but it's historically, there would have been people who had no contact with that kind of system because it didn't exist. What would they do?
Oh, historically,
famous scientists.
I was going to say, historically, a lot of them wouldn't have done particularly well.
There are numerous famous scientists who are phenomenally dyslexic who've had no contact with those kinds of interventions, nor are they musical or dancing. And I was just wondering if you could use those as comparison cases to draw out some of the kinds of comments that Martin was children.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of very famous dyslexic people who are dancers. There are lots of famous dancers who are not dyslexic. There are lots of famous scientists who are and are not dyslexic. So we do need to try and tap into what is it in these particular people.
So the real question is this a panacea or is this an artifact? That's what I'm really asking.
That's what we're trying to dig down into.
I don't know, but I think what you might like to know is that it is very possible that people who are musical and are dyslexic are more likely to choose to become dancers than violinists. Because if you cannot read a score, it would be so painful to practice reading scores, etc., that you may as well express your musicality in and out. So there may be, it is possible that we will find a bimodal distribution. So I think when we will have the data, we may have to ask some help about modeling, because there may be some of these factors that we need to keep into account.
Okay, we're going to wrap up. I saw some individual questions. You can approach them at the coffee break.
Thank you. And then it's back here at 12 o'clock.
So Tony, yeah, yours is already there, but feel free to.
Sorry, is this just Fabius?
Yeah, no, I just,
Your old one is in there.
Yeah, well, no, I bought,
So,
quite a big one, but
yeah, fine, thanks.
What's your, what's the name of your file?
I'm just getting it on the
Community as well.
oh, okay. It's called Contemporary Issues. Oh, it'll be in a peculiar place. Let's see.
You've got the Christmas job on this. So just ask Lemmy. I did think, yeah. Yeah. Lemmy, where's the original USB that I had? Ah, you pocketed it. Thank you. No, it wasn't. There was in that computer. Remember? It was a black. No, black one. How is it? No, that's sorry. Beg your pardon. That's what the logic.
Oh, okay.
You'll take the one that has a slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, you took it.
Sorry. Just need to get my deeps on there.
All the things I've lost is in my mind almost.
What my lipsticks for.
Was it training?
Okay, so where am I putting this? This is
Desktop.